Hey people, if you are subscribed to this channel, you know that we are mostly talking about topics concerning music, learning and personal development. And today's topic is especially important. When are we allowed to say that we have learned something? When do we know that we are actually truly able to do something on our instrument? First of all, there is actually one phenomenon that is measurable, a physiological phenomenon. Our brain is pretty busy and flexible. New connections are constantly made and old ones broken up. But if one certain connection is used all the time, it becomes stronger and eventually it even becomes myelinated. Myelin is a fatty substance that surrounds the nerve cells' axons, those are the nervous system's wires, to insulate them and increase the rate at which electrical impulses, called the action potentials, are passed along the axon. And that is exactly what happens when you get the feeling of flow, when you don't have to work hard to execute something, because something in our brain has actually been physiologically altered and the current in our brain runs faster. Imagine it this way. If you walk a path once, it becomes overgrown pretty quickly. If you walk that path regularly, it stays free. And if many people walk the same path regularly, it will eventually get paved. Then you can walk or drive on that path much quicker and safer, even if it's not been used for a while. That is learning on a physiological level. When you have done something often enough, it becomes easier and easier. And eventually it will work by itself. We have truly learned to do something if you can do it under different circumstances and even after a long time. You see, learning is oftentimes defined as learning by heart. And that is exactly what happens in music. We're learning movements, movement patterns and melodies and so on by heart. In classical music, we're even learning complete pieces of music by heart. But if you rather like to play music that heavily relies on improvisation, like jazz, rock, pop or heavy metal, different skills grow more important. And the different circumstances I just mentioned have to be practiced as well. So here are 5 things you can keep in mind when practicing and actually measure if you have truly mastered something in a real musical context. Number 1. Can you repeat it more often than absolutely necessary? That may sound redundant since we have to repeat it anyway in order to learn it. But remember that we have to be able to repeat it many times at our desired tempo. I used to play the snare drum etudes by Charlie Wilcoxon and noticed that when I had reached my desired tempo, I just barely made it through the piece and stumbled over the finish line. I wasn't able to play it a second time. And thus I've established a new criterion for myself. I wanted to be able to play it 2 times, back to back, without a break. Only then I was truly convinced that I was able to do it. Listen, if you can only play it once, barely, you will definitely not make it when you're tired or under pressure, or if you're playing on different equipment. And at a rehearsal or in the studio, we have to repeat it a few times anyway. This way, we're giving ourselves more space, more headroom. We will play something with much more confidence if we know that we could easily play it 10 times. And as a bonus, you can work on details and make it sound even better when repeating it many times. Number 2, can you play it in a different tempo? So obviously, can you play it faster or even combine it with tip number 1? Can you play a song 3 times back to back at 10 BPMs faster? In sports, when you've trained something with add-on weights and leave them out for competition, you've gained yourself some headroom that will easily be filled by nervousness and the changing conditions. This way you will gain security. But it's not only about playing faster, but maybe even slower. A slower tempo forces you to be much more precise with your timing and also reveals inaccuracies. Sometimes on the drum set, when you play a fill for example, you're just trying to get from point A to point B and don't pay much attention to all the notes in between. When you're playing that same fill much slower, you will notice the sloppy bits very easily and have the opportunity to work on the details under a microscope. When you then increase the tempo again, you will sound much more accurate and better. Number 3, can you play every part of what you're playing by itself? For drummers, that would mean all the different limbs. For example, can you play the snare drum by itself to a click, including all the ghost notes? For a choir, that would mean every voice by itself. So, can you sing your voice in isolation without the rest of the choir? If you can do that, you know that you have understood every detail of what you want to play. And you know that your limbs can move independently from each other. Independence is what we drummers want to achieve, but certainly pianists as well. I've noticed that I sound so much better when all my limbs can play to the click independently from each other. That is, when I can control my hands and feet independently. And I mean, independent can also mean that you are in control. So you are sovereign, and this way, playing with independence of your limbs may result in sounding much more confident. This may contradict my definition of learning as learning by heart, and of course you can learn and actually play something with confidence by repeating it as a whole. But again, I want to emphasize the real world, the practical context of playing music. And in the real world, it can happen that you hit a wrong note, that you make a mistake. When you make a mistake with one limb, but you only have practiced it as a whole, everything will fall apart. But if you have practiced every limb on its own, and you make a mistake with one limb, the others can keep playing, while the one limb that made the mistake can come back in quickly. Or it might happen that you lose a stick, or that you need to fix a microphone with one hand. And here again, the headroom I've mentioned earlier will help us. If you can play the different parts by themselves, you will play them with much more confidence and accuracy when you combine them. Number 4, the most important test. Can you count out loud while playing? Or for singers, brass or wind instrument players, can you count at your head or tap your foot on the floor? This test is crucial because especially in jazz, rock and pop music, we base everything off of the pulse and try to play as tight to the click as possible. And if at any point we can't control the pulse and can't verbalize it anymore, we should practice until we can do exactly that. Again, it will sound better. You can think of your voice as your fifth limb. By practicing this fifth limb, you're giving yourself more headroom. When you're able to execute something including this fifth limb, you will almost certainly be able to execute it without it. Again, those are the add-on weights.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1.
And number 5, can you teach it to somebody else? Nothing brought me further on my instrument than teaching it. First of all, it made me realize what I couldn't do. Whenever something was not internalized, I wasn't able to teach it. That's why we need all of the first 4 points on my list if we want to teach it to somebody else. We need to be able to play it many times in order to demonstrate it. We need to be able to play it slowly in order to make it clear. We need to be able to demonstrate and explain every single part, and therefore we need to understand them first. And ideally, we need to be able to count out loud or explain while playing the part. Counting is important to show students where the pulse is and where the rhythm is relative to the pulse. So, if you want to test if you have fully understood something, try to teach it to somebody else. If it works, great. It's an amazing feeling to pass on your knowledge and experience. If not, try to work on tips 1 to 4. When you take these 5 criteria into account, you will most definitely spend more time on one single exercise. But I can only encourage you, Do that. You will gain so much more if you dive deep into one topic or exercise instead of scratching the surface of many different things. Because if you only scratch the surface, you will only get to know the surface. And don't worry, you won't miss out on anything. When you go deep on one topic, you will always learn something for other topics as well, because you always work on general skills that you can transfer to other exercises. You work on control, precision, independence, counting, and awareness for pulse and timing, and those are some pretty important skills. And you are practicing one more skill: knowing when you can truly do something. When you use these 5 criteria with a few exercises or songs, you get a feeling for where you're at. You can better estimate if you would be able to play this under pressure or not. And I can promise you this: if you practice with these high standards, you will feel much more confident when playing and also sound more confident. I hope you could take something away from this video and put it into practice on your instrument or in your field. Please comment below in which area did you apply these 5 tips. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to this channel, because I'm always putting out new videos on topics like music, personal development, learning in general, and of course, the drums. So I will be seeing you in the next one. Until then, take care and bye bye.